Nicole Ouellette, thank you very much for being here today. Just in case you haven't been hanging out with us for the last little while, I'm going to go over a few more rules because I would have done that at the beginning and I missed the beginning today. So there are interpretation devices at the back of the room. For any of those of you who were not here earlier, it may also help you hear, even if you do understand the language that is being spoken. And I would ask that you stick to the 30-minute time frame. If you wish to field questions, which we find that to be very useful to have the opportunity to question you, but that's entirely up to you. It's your choice. I can warn you if you want me to stop you at 15 or 10 minutes, I'll probably interject and just let you know you have 10 minutes left anyhow. And applause really is not appropriate for this venue. It's not appropriate in court, it's not appropriate in the legislature, and it's not, oh, cell phones, thank you very much. Also, we would prefer no recording, no picture taking as well. Did I miss anything? Tweeting. Oh, are we not allowed to tweet? Okay, I think that's as far as we go. Go ahead, Ms. Ouellette. I didn't tweet anything.
I'd like to thank you all for having me here today, and I would like to share with you my story. So it's the story that has led me to stand before you, urging you to consider all the information as it pertains to Bill 39 and act respecting proof of immunization. Dominic Cardy, in his interview with CBC on Monday morning, stated, "I don't know what motivates these people," referring to the whole community against mandatory vaccination. And personally, I take great offense to the insinuations of the child advocate just now, suggesting that parents who opt not to vaccinate their children are somehow negligent, harmful, and it requires state intervention to protect their children from harm. I think that in order to understand the perspective of others, we need to begin with true curiosity. We need to understand what motivates the other. And I think rather than immediately dismissing someone with derogatory comments, judgment, and hate-filled comments, we should listen, and listen to understand. And in that understanding, despite our differences, we might come to a place of compassion. You know, a committee member this morning asked what it takes for the two sides to come together, to hear, to come to some kind of consensus. And it doesn't start with division, and it doesn't start with judgment. I'm a born New Brunswicker. I left to study neuroscience at an honors level at Dalhousie University, as the program wasn't offered here in New Brunswick. I returned home after its completion, working and studying for my medical entrance exams. Though successfully completed, my career path was drastically altered and I left once again, this time to Montreal to complete a master's program in social work. Again, a program not offered in my language here in New Brunswick. Despite lucrative possibilities, I returned. I chose to return. I returned because I consider New Brunswick my home. Its way of life echoes in my heart, and the ocean waves run through my veins. It is also here that I chose to become a mother. Only mothers can think of the future because they gave birth to it with their children. Maxim Gorky. The most difficult part of birth is the first year afterwards. It is a year of travail when the soul of a woman must birth the mother inside her. The emotional labor pains of becoming a mother are far greater than the physical pangs of birth. These are the growing surges of your heart as it pushes out selfishness, fear, and makes room for sacrifice and love. It is a private and silent birth of the soul, but it is no less holy than the event of childbirth, and perhaps even more sacred. Joy Cusick. There is something incredibly transformative in becoming a mother. You see and enter a space which before was invisible to you. The future and its decisions rest heavy on your heart, heavy with the knowledge that your choices and decisions are no longer your own. Your decisions and choices now irrevocably shape and determine who another human will become. You tremble with the realization that the human being's very essence, who they are and who they will be, lies with you, and with you alone. This sacred responsibility is intimate, and it is deep, and the emotional reckoning it requires is pain and beauty intertwined. This emotional reckoning brought me to my knees. The realization that I am and will be forever a mother was not an easy journey for me. It cost me more than I could have imagined, demanded of me more than I ever thought I could give, and awakened parts of me I never knew existed. This birthing process for me was an intimate, private, and lonely one. But perhaps it had to be, as it was the knitting of my soul to my child's. This, I believe, is the origination of maternal sacrifice, where a mother will willingly give her life for her child's, because a mother knows her soul is no longer her own. My soul is now intricately linked to that of my daughter, a tiny human named Olivia. She is a wise, brilliant, gentle little girl. At almost 2.5, she is an excellent problem solver, a world-class negotiator, and the best hugger around. She is cautious in who she shares herself with, observant and empathetic. You can't know what you don't know, and you can't know about the things you have yet to discover. Jonathan Raymond. Not once in 31 years did I question vaccines. I am fully vaccinated, and having traveled, I have had some vaccines that many have not. When I was pregnant, like many mothers, I was vehement that everyone who would visit after birth should have the Tdap vaccine to protect her from whooping cough. In the hospital after her birth, I was administered the MMR and the Tdap vaccine. It's not that I had a firm stance on vaccines. It's that I had given them no deliberation at all. My view and use of vaccines for myself was complacent and automatic. However, the birthing of a mother no longer allows space for automaticity and complacency. When it comes to my child, because of her voicelessness and her vulnerability, my choices become hers, my actions, her repercussions, and my power, her rights. Because of this, every decision I have made for her has been heavily weighted. My decision then to choose to act and to use my power in terms of vaccinating her had to become reflective rather than reflexive. I learned that at birth, all babies are vaccinated against hepatitis B, and I wanted to understand what would be injected into my tiny, defenseless child moments after birth. According to the Society of Obstetrics and Gynecologists of Canada, hepatitis B is an infection of the liver caused by the hepatitis B virus. The risk factors for contracting hepatitis B are having unprotected sex with an infected person, having a sexually transmitted infection, using injection drugs and sharing of contaminant material, receiving a tattoo or piercing with unsterilized equipment, and being born to a hepatitis B infected mother. I was tested for hepatitis B during pregnancy, and my test was negative. I couldn't understand why my child would be vaccinated against a disease she couldn't possibly have contracted. Her only risk factor at birth, me, had been excluded. Therefore, at her birth, I opted out of hepatitis B for her. And thus began my descent into what was somewhat affectionately termed the rabbit hole. Science knows no country, because knowledge belongs to humanity, and it is the torch which illuminates the world. The time and space here is too short to share all the research, questioning, and knowledge-seeking that engulfed a year of my life. Thus, I will trust in the information shared by previous presenters and those to come. I do, however, want to walk you along a bunny trail within this rabbit hole. There are two types of vaccines, live attenuated and inactivated. According to the Canadian vaccine schedule, all vaccines until the age of 12 months are of the inactivated form, with the exception of the newly introduced oral rotavirus vaccine. According to the CDC Pink Book, inactivated vaccines are not alive and cannot replicate. The entire dose of the antigen is administered in the injection. Inactivated vaccines always require multiple doses. In general, the first dose does not produce protective immunity, but primes the immune system. A protective immune response develops after the second or third dose, in contrast to live vaccines in which the immune response closely resembles natural infection. The immune response to an inactivated vaccine is mostly humoral. Little or no cellular immunity results. Therefore, antibody titers against inactivated antigens diminish with time. I was curious how the immune system could be activated in response to an inactive virus, a virus which by definition would pose no threat to the body. It was then that I learned about adjuvants. Adjuvants are substances which increase the immunogenicity of the antigen, the capacity of the inactivated virus to stimulate and mount an immune response in the body. In Canada, vaccines given to infants and toddlers exclusively contain aluminum salts as the adjuvant. It is the adjuvant to which the inactivated virus is coupled that mounts an immune response. Without the adjuvant, the vaccine would be ineffective in stimulating an immune response high enough to confer any type of protection. My next questions then became, why and how does the body mount an immune response to the aluminum salt? And what happens to that aluminum salt in the body? The why is simple. Aluminum is an experimentally demonstrated neurotoxin. When injected, it mounts an inflammatory response, thus triggering an immune response. This is the humoral response that was referred to earlier. How the body mounts an immune response to aluminum salts requires more time than we have here today, but I would urge you to look up the associated references, as understanding its mechanism of action is key to understanding the downstream and long-term effects on the body. And so you might wonder, as I did, what happens to such a toxin as aluminum when injected into the human body? One would assume it's being excreted, given that we repeatedly inject our most vulnerable and ourselves with it. This would be a monumentally dangerous and false assumption. And in fact, we have a plethora of scientific studies demonstrating its deposits in the body's organs, and most importantly, the brain. Now let's put this together. Aluminum is a neurotoxin. It is demonstrably not eliminated, but it is bioaccumulated, meaning it builds up in the body. We need to be asking ourselves what the impact of this bioaccumulation is. The adverse reactions, as listed on the vaccine inserts themselves, are indicative of their toxic and dangerous nature. Hypotonic and hyporesponsive episodes, which is a sudden onset of poor muscle tone, reduced consciousness, and a pale or bluish skin. Bronchospasm, which is a narrowing of the bronchi in the lungs. Seizure, difficulty breathing, encephalitis, encephalopathy, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a disorder in which the body's immune system attacks your nerves, and it can lead to full body paralysis. Acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, which is a brief but widespread attack of inflammation in the brain and the spinal cord that damages myelin, the protective covering of nerve fibers. Transverse myelitis, which is an inflammation on both sides of the spinal cord. And on they go. And what's more, scientific studies from neurology to chemistry have demonstrated correlation between aluminum deposits and neurodegenerative diseases and autoimmunity, where autoimmunity is when the body attacks itself and treats it as an invader. This is not to be confused with immunity. Not one doctor or public health employee could tell me about aluminum and its associated risks. And oh, did I try. The reactions to my question got one of two responses. immediate shutdown and reiteration that my fears were unfounded, that vaccines are safe and tested for their safety, and who was I to question a medical authority? Or a seemingly infinite referral to the right source who could answer my questions, who never seemed to materialize. And so deeper into the rabbit hole I sank. I learned that there exist no vaccine safety trials which contain a placebo. The gold standard in medical research. Vaccines are either safety tested against a previous version of the vaccine or against the adjuvant itself, the very element which is dangerous. If you look at the vaccine insert, you can see it for yourself. There is no control condition. Any first-year undergraduate science major can tell you, if you don't have a control condition, you don't have any experimental measures. And if you don't have any experimental measures, that renders your experiment essentially meaningless. Did you know that with the exception of extraneous proteins, no safety testing is required for the individual components in vaccines or the vaccine schedule itself? I didn't. Did you know that aluminum levels in vaccines is based on immune efficacy, so how well it can mount an immune response, and ignores body weight for safety? That means that a 1-year-old infant receives the same MMR vaccine as a fully grown adult. Did you know that by ratio, micrograms to weight, every single vaccine on the infant and toddler schedule exceeds any known standards of safety for aluminum injection? The first vaccine my child would have received at the age of 2 months when she weighed no more than 12 pounds was the Penticil vaccine, which is a vaccine which contains 5 different vaccines in one. Its aluminum to weight ratio exceeds any known measures of safety by almost a factor of 12.5. And this doesn't even factor into the other vaccines that she would have also received that day. Did you know, not very good with the, did you know that according to U.S. legislation, that no vaccine manufacturer shall be liable in a civil action for damage arising from a vaccine-related injury or death associated with the administration of a vaccine after October 1st, 1988, even if the injury or death resulted from side effects that were unavoidable? Did you know that law in Canada parallels this ruling? Did you know that other than Quebec, no Canadian province has a vaccine injury compensation program? Did you know that the U.S. Supreme Court itself has stated that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe? In any society, there's a natural tension between the interests of individuals and the interests of the group as a whole. In proposing this bill, Dominic Carty has asked for the authority to protect students, and most especially the immunocompromised are highlighted. But this bill is not that. It is not a debate around the tension of my right as a parent, which is allowed to supersede the rights, health, and well-being of others. This argument is only sensical should vaccines pose no risk. Or are we then not trading one group of vulnerability and risk for another? And who then assumes this risk? Who then decides? And even supposing for a moment this bill is that, motivated in the public good, we must then also draw the logical conclusion that infringement on people's capacity to make medical decisions for themselves in this regard is only just beginning. For it is not only children who become a risk to be managed, but as Dominic Carty has stated, all those in the schools. He himself has stated that his next steps involve discussion with teachers' unions and others whose work places them in the public school system. However, children don't only frequent schools, they are people embedded in communities. They participate in sports, in the arts, in church, in camps. You can then start to see how this bill's reach cannot possibly be limited to school systems alone. Its reach will extend to every single person accessing public spaces, including every one of us sitting here today. We are on the road to creating exclusion and segregation in our communities. I want to raise my child in a community which extends her equal membership with equal rights. Despite the cost, financial and otherwise, to myself and my family, I will not raise my daughter in a space where she will be vilified and treated as a second-class citizen. When we choose to be parents, we accept another human being as part of ourselves, and a large part of our emotional selves will stay with that person as long as we live. From that time on, there will be another person on this earth whose orbit around us will affect us as surely as the moon affects the tides, and affects us in some ways more deeply than anyone else can. Our children are extensions of ourselves. Fred Rogers. You passed this bill. It is not merely paperwork or policy. You pass this bill, it's people's lives. It is their health, it is their well-being. Underlying every single parent decision, regardless of context, is the intent to protect their child, to keep them safe, to allow them to thrive. A study looking at parental decision-making in the context of childhood terminal cancer highlights this. Regardless of whether they opted for experimental treatment for their child or palliative measures, both groups underline the following as guideposts in their decision-making. A willingness to support and guide their child, both physically and mentally. Choosing in the best interest of their child, and a motivation to do what is most fitting for their child. A sacrifice, the willingness to do anything to benefit the child. So we may sit in different positions, but our motivations are the same. So it is this entwining of these intentions and my intimate knowing of my child and our connection which informs my decision-making for her until she can take on this responsibility herself. This is a knowing that the government cannot possibly access. With this bill, you strip away parental authority, eroding the intimacy of the parent-child relationship to one of mediator of state will. In shifting the balance of power for parental decision-making in this way, you not only eliminate decision-making in terms of medical choice, but you disregard and you trivialize the very essence of the parent's love, which fuels their decisions. In a world which is crying out for more connection, acceptance, community, and sense of self, we continue to take away and erode all levels of attachment and connection in all aspects. Until we learn the depth of reach of our decision-making, we will continue to have broken, disconnected communities and broken, disconnected people. And so we return to the beginning. What motivates me is my responsibility born in motherhood. What motivates me is my child. It is the weight I carry every day, knowing that my choices become hers, my actions, her repercussions, my power, her rights. Who other than her mother can without question take on this protectionist and self-sacrificing role? Who else's intentions can be measured to this level of conviction? Is it the pharmacological industry, motivated by their profits and shareholders, who have been legally shielded from this responsibility? Just a cursory glance in recent history will highlight just whose interests they uphold. The Vioxx scandal brought to light the industry's tendency to sit in a position of safe until proven unsafe. Minimization of potential safety concerns, dismissal of independent findings, and engagement in practices of justification, dismissal, and occlusion. These same practices are highlighted in the new ruling against Johnson & Johnson in their role in the opioid crisis. Recent headlines in terms of generic drugs shortages, especially as it pertains to cancer treatment, have highlighted the importance of financial incentives in terms of drug manufacturing and availability, not patient need. Is it Dominic Carty, the presenter of this bill, or the child advocate, who lobby a one-size-fits-all for a population who is inherently different and unique? I urge you to not only consider if you feel informed enough about vaccines, or whether you are motivated by the public good, but to reflect if you can unequivocally say you're willing to take on the responsibility that this bill entails. For it is with this depth of reflection and knowledge-seeking which have led me to the decisions I have made and will make for my child. The responsibility you take on in moving forward with this bill is the burden of parental responsibility for every single child impacted by this bill, not just in the immediacy, but in perpetuity. You also take on all the unforeseen and indirect ways in which this bill damages the parents and the very core of the parent-child relationship. And so moving forward, I ask you to enter a space of reflection, a space of listening, and a space of compassion. Thank you.
Ms. Rogers?
I'm not sure how much time we have. I've lost count.
We have 6 minutes.
Okay. I didn't so much have a question, although I'll do one small question after my statement. I just wanted to again say thank you for your heartfelt presentation, and it sounds like you're coming from an informed and educated perspective. I want to ask a couple of things that I think are very related. Is your biggest concern about missing information or about the information that we know? And if it's about the information we know, do you feel you have adequate references to be able to substantiate that? So, or is it about missing information, or is it about what we know?
I think for me, I came to my conclusion based on what I could find in terms of the scientific studies.
Peer-reviewed?
Peer-reviewed, yeah, I have the references if you guys would like those. And so for me, it is a combination of what we know, which seems quite dangerous, and it is a lack of information in terms of what we don't know. So if presented with the things we do know and there is no counterbalance and no voice speaking to what we don't know, then I'm left in a void of not accessing enough information.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I'll pass it on to someone else.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you for being here today. You're obviously very motivated, very informed, and I appreciate you being here and having the courage to be here.
Thank you.
And I'm not quite sure, are you against the bill or in favor of the bill?
I'm against the bill.
Pardon?
I'm against the bill.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to reiterate the comments of my colleagues and appreciate very much the time that you've taken to be here today. Actually, though, I do have one question. Where are you traveling from today?
I live in Fredericton.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.